see you all, and the wind is what it is, but I'm very nervous about my pages flying all around. That could happen. So today we wanted to spend a little time talking about time from a perspective of people of faith, what time looks like for us and means to us. We are all time beings. So this is a sermon for all of us. We live in real time, and our days are numbered with a bunch of ticking of clocks. And I have this great view of our clock as I even say that. The rise and fall of the sun sets the course of our days. So our days can be quite literally measured as time beings. That's not the only view of time we might have, is it, Charlie?
One of the We're good. We're good. One of the distinctions that Susan and I wanted to share with you today about time is two Greek words. One is chronos, as in chronology, sequence of events, and the other is kairos. Kairos? A little bit of both. The Greek word also for time, but not in a sense of chronology, but more in a sense of fullness of events or coming around. So that some of you are grandparents here, right? Well, so this new grandchild that I have, Clara, is 6 months old, and the question is, so when will she start walking? Right? Mike, your grandfather, you can give me a date. She was born February 24th. What do you think? Too soon. Too soon, he says. Well, we'll get back to Anna and Andrew on that. So, but the pediatrician says, about a year or so. But what we know, or at least what we experience, is Clara will walk in the fullness of her own time. In kairos, K-A-I-R-O-S, that Greek word of time. When it's time, when she's ready, it will happen. Hard to rush it, can't do it. But when it happens, it will be followed by a time zone change in a way after the kairos of now walking. It probably moves into chaos, I think, in terms of a little more at the other end. And God have mercy on Anna and Andrew, get their running shoes out and be ready. But kind of like I remember as a child in planting seeds in a garden, and the back of the packet would say, 12, 14 days to come up above the ground, and blossoms on the zinnias 45 to 55 days. As a youngster, I would go and mark and circle the date on the calendar, waiting, going out, assuming that at day 45 the first blossoms would appear. Well, the packet should really say first blossoms around kairos, in God's time. When it's full, when it happens, it will be then complete and done. So what I realize sometimes is that chronology and chronos, sometimes our language, my language, limits me. I like to watch the weather forecast at night. It says winds, from the west-northwest coming in, daylight is 13 hours and 49 minutes. It'll be rather gusty, up to 25 miles an hour. Sunset, 7:32. Well, remember, any of you read, who was the author of Christopher Robin? A.A. Milne, right? Well, remember Christopher Robin and his friends? Remember Piglet? Oh, we're a little scared of what's going on. And Eeyore, oh, it's a nice day outside, but I think it's going to rain by lunchtime. And then there's Pooh Bear. Oh, Pooh Bear was so adorable. And remember what Pooh Bear would say to Christopher Robin on a windy day? It's a blustery day, Christopher Robin. He didn't say 15 to 25 miles an hour wind, but what a great description. It's a blustery day. We go to Fenway Park. If we have to, we go to Yankee Stadium. And it's a blustery day. What a great description. Which makes me wonder sometimes if in my own language I limit the possibilities of expanding and understanding. It's blustery outside today. How much more rich that is than just the numbers of the south by southwest miles an hour. So I do wonder at times if my own language limits, restricts, confines, and if my own images sometimes may be biased in my own blindness. So anyway, to share some of those thoughts about time, kairos, chronos, and the ways that at least Susan and I speaking has been opening my eyes further.
I also think the way that we live through time shows us that time does not tick off in even units. We may be anticipating, for example, an event that's happening in the future, and so we spend time planning it, and we spend time looking forward to it, and getting the plane tickets and the reservations or whatever is necessary. And so even though it will take up a discrete number of days, we enrich our attention around it and so experience the time that it takes in a more expansive way. When Charlie and I got together to talk about this sermon, we were sitting by his lake in a couple of chairs right in front of his dock. And in the meanwhile, there was a person cutting branches down right next to his property, one property over, that enhanced your view quite a bit. Yeah. And you probably had been in that property for long enough to remember when those branches weren't in the way. And yet they grow so incrementally that it's this experience of not really noticing what's happened until they're all the way in the way and need to be cut down. And indeed, nature seems to keep time in different ways than we keep time. It doesn't require a clock. And so the trees grow at their own pace. And the rocks even change shape at their own pace. Biblical images will often talk about things like rocks or mountains as unchanging. But in fact, even they are changing. Near our lake house, there is a large rock that's big enough that you can sit on it and put some chairs there, and it is right next to the water. And when I was a little girl, my mom taught me to sweep off that rock and to dig the roots out of all the crevices. And she said, the reason why you do that is because eventually they will break the rock apart, and we want to keep this rock together for as long as possible. So every summer I go and sweep off that rock and dig all the little seedlings and roots out of every single crevice so that rock is still there. So I mark the seasons by doing that repeatedly, by helping that rock stay a little bit more stable, but it is keeping time in a way that's very different. We also mark our lives with celebrations that appear on repeated basis. Our birthdays, Christmas and Easter. Even though we live in time, there's the sense of time circling back on itself too as we celebrate those religious events in our lives, those moments in history when God has been revealed to us. We repeat them season after season. living time both through history, but also living time with the sense of the cyclical and what is coming back to us. If we are lucky, those celebrations will have a sense of that fullness of time for us, sparkling moments when we find times that the chronos part of time disintegrating and instead live in a kind of suspended moment or two, in a sacred moment, meeting God in those places.
Those sacred moments often are morning worship, kairos. We as clergy, this may surprise you, are actually smarter than we look in general. And yeah. Now that I'm retired, I get it. And that for what we know is that for Sunday morning, for 1 hour, we have that time to work with. And we call it sacred time, kairos. We have God's time. We don't look at our watches, right? Go like this. We don't look at our watches in that hour, but we have that time that is, in a way, the 60 minutes is suspended. Now, woe be unto you if it gets to be 57, 58 minutes, then we start looking at our clocks. But we do set aside, and we call it time for worship. One of the discoveries that I shared with Susan just the other day was that sitting my habit with morning coffee down by the water, trying not to take my phone with me, not always successful, but I'll sit for 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes or so and watch, listen, have another sip of coffee, let the world go by. And what I find is, as time is suspended in a way for me, I enter that kind of God's time, kairos, that my memories start to float back to elementary school and the school lunch people. Floats back to days in college and how nervous I was that first week. Time and space seem to open up for me when I'm able to kind of set time aside, and it opens up more aspects of my life. When I'm not watching the clock, I'm seeing my surroundings. When I'm not telling time, the space is telling me where I've been. And I believe help gives me direction then for the rest of the day.
Making me think about how there's that wonderful expression that people say to parents of small children, that when you're raising children, the days are long, but the years are short. Love that expression. Probably true for many of us around certain parts of our lives, that we realize that we may be slogging through something, but when we look back, it seems like it passed just in a heartbeat. I also think about how childhood memories are. And as I look back, I don't remember my childhood as a stream of events, but these sort of little moments pop up that are definitive, that say something about who I was growing to be, or who my parents were in relationship with me or my siblings. And those stories end up being very important as we shape our time as adults. Imbue meaning on our time. I loved that my parents forgot that we were rotten children. And so when Greg and I brought our children to them, and they're as their grandchildren, they would occasionally say something like, "Well, you all never did that." And I thought to myself, of course we did. But I also thought to myself, isn't that wonderful that memory shapes your experience of people? So, and some of those bad times fade. In the long run, our dearest and most important memories are the ones that are going to shape our understanding of ourselves and shape how we go about living on earth. Some of the dailiness of our lives gets forgotten. We will remember celebrations and people visiting, but we'll forget washing the dishes after they left, for example. Another expression I love is how we spend our days is how you spend our life. Is how we spend our lives. How we spend our days is how we spend our lives. So even though we don't forget, we don't remember the dailiness is part of shaping who we are as well. And so attending to spending our time on important things, even in the everyday, can be really important. We don't just have this blank slate of time that we're supposed to fill up with our accomplishments. Our history as a people is made up of the threads that we weave and the threads that other people weave as well. And so time becomes something that's not just ours alone, it's something that we share together and that we should attend to as we spend our time with others, creating the community that God intends for us. So it's a work of discernment to look at history and see what has happened. And the discernment is to also say, where has God been present in that history for me or for my community? And how do we weave history together and weave our future together in a way that's pleasing as we spend our time?
Those memories and reading history. 3 weeks ago, I attended the worship service. I happened to be in town over at Christ Church. It was the last of the services there before they closed the doors. Was glad, pleased to attend on behalf of South Church. Susan was out of state that day, and I happened to be free. And the service was full of memories, touchstones, parents who had been married there, grandparents, others shared who had been buried there, from there, public suppers downstairs, scout groups, and it was all those memories were like those stone cairns on the hiking trail, looking back both where we've been, where they have been as a church, history of the Kennebunk's, as well as guiding of where those cairns might be leading ahead. Kairos, Chronos coming together at the same time. One of the memories that I have thinking about, and I'm not sure if it's Chronos or Kairos. My father, primarily was a teacher, but did serve a church down in the Newbury, Raleigh, Massachusetts area for a short time while he was finishing up his degree. And when it came after the scripture reading, one of the well-seasoned members of the church, as the sermon would start, would put a hand in his pocket, pulled out a hard candy or lifesaver, put it in his mouth. The sermon would go on, the lifesaver would gradually disappear, and he would then put a second one in. Gradually it would dissolve, and when the second lifesaver was done, the preacher better be done as well. Now, I don't know if that's kind of Chronos, because you can, sequence to it, 2 lifesavers, 2 hard candies, or if that's a sense of Kairos, never sure exactly how long you'll have until that second one is dissolved. Yeah, Susan was asking, did he ever chew it to kind of like, let's move us along here a little bit. The last story to share about time and how things blend together. This last couple of weeks I've been putting some paint or stain, actually, Kevin stain, on the camp where I stay. And I'll do a section at a time, an hour and a half or so. And so I finished one of the sections early on and stood back to behold my work, and it looked terrible. Oh my gosh, it was splotchy. Was it poor paint? So I go back to Lowe's. Did I not stir it enough? Was it the painter? What was the problem? I got the can out and it said, well, in 30 to 60 minutes, beginning to dry but still tacky, 24 hours for full dry. So 30 to 60 minutes, so I waited 25. I thought that was plenty long enough. It looked terrible, all splotchy. So, what do you do but fix a sandwich, get some Cheetos, grab the A&W root beer, and sit by the water, do some reading. Came back about an hour and a half later. It was beautiful. All the brush strokes had disappeared. It was mostly dry. It had blended all together. You never know exactly which panel I started with, working my way down. I think it was Isaiah that said, we'll lift up the valleys and make them high, and the mountaintops will make low, and the rough places will become a plain. And perhaps adding that even those splotchy areas of paint will dry in completeness in the kairos of God's time, and will be smooth and complete, and I and you and all of us together will behold the goodness of what God has done in time, patience, but in the fullness of God's time.